Welcome to What the Plus, a survey of the last century of pop culture as filtered through Disney Plus. I'm Garrett Martin, a writer and editor, and a guy who stupidly decided to go to Disney World during a pandemic. I'm actually there right now, today. Not my today. While I'm recording this, I'm actually sitting at my desk in my office at home right now, speaking into a microphone. But when this episode goes up, when it goes live on Thursday, I'm going to be at the Magic Kingdom with 2 masks on, ready to punch anyone who gets within 6 feet of me, and desperately trying to not be stressed out of my mind. Apparently it's still like 89 degrees down there. I don't know. Awesome. So I've been as serious about COVID as anybody I know. I don't eat out. I don't really see friends or family. The few times that I have, it's been outside with masks on. My wife and I did just drive to the Grand Canyon and back a couple of weeks ago, which meant staying in hotels and eating inside a few restaurants. I was a little worried about it at first. You kind of get used to it. I don't know. I seem healthy. I don't think I got anything out there. Let's hope not. I guess I'm slowly getting back out there, right, as the whole pandemic has gotten worse than it's ever been. Great timing, right? So, of course, there are a lot of things you expect at Disney World that aren't happening there right now. No fireworks, no parades, no meet and greets. I won't be doing any of them. I also won't see any trace of today's movie at any of the parks. That's not because of COVID, but because despite being a really good, really fun movie that got positive reviews, and that's actually more relevant today than it was when it came out, The Rocketeer wasn't a success back in 1991. It's never really had much of a theme park presence. Maybe it was the lack of famous stars, maybe the fact that it's not a recognizable property. Maybe it's because the tone and subject matter felt too similar to Indiana Jones, or the fact that the marketing made it seem like one more obscure comic-based movie riding in the wake of Batman's success. Either way, nobody in 1991 was really all that excited for the swashbuckling Art Deco action of The Rocketeer. It has its passionate fans, though, and one of them is Josh Spiegel, a pop culture writer who regularly opines on Disney business at sites like Slash Film and Consequence of Sound. He's also the person behind those big March Madness-style Disney brackets on Twitter. If you've ever found yourself voting on the best attraction at Disneyland or to pick out the best vocal performance at a Disney animated feature, you're almost definitely engaging with one of Josh's Twitter polls. He also hosted a podcast very similar to this one, Mousterpiece Cinema, for almost an entire decade. So that's just to say that Josh is an expert on Disney movies and maybe the biggest fan The Rocketeer has ever had. I was not surprised when this is the movie he picked, based on how much he has gushed over this thing on social media and in the articles he's written for other websites. Meanwhile, I had never seen it, despite being the perfect age for it. I was in middle school when it came out. I love superheroes and Indiana Jones and Disney and old-timey jive and punching Nazis and all that. And going to movies was basically all my friends and I did, but we never went to this one. We never even really discussed it. I wasn't remotely a cool kid, but I do remember thinking that The Rocketeer felt a little square. It came, it went, I figured I'd never think about it again, and then over the years, I started to wonder why I never watched it. Why something that seemed so perfect for me completely failed to get me into the theater. I'm not going to get too into all that right now. Josh and I talk about all this stuff over the next 50 minutes, but my interest in The Rocketeer 180'd so much over the decades that it wound up being the very first thing I watched when Disney Plus launched last year. And hey, it's great. I want to go back to 1991 and tell middle school me to stop being such a dingus and go see the fun movie. Until that's possible, here's me and Josh Spiegel digging into what makes 1991's The Rocketeer so special. So, hey, I'm talking to Josh Spiegel, a writer and a critic all over the place, something of a Disney expert. How's it going, Josh?
Going all right. How about you?
I'm good. I think one way people know you, this is how my wife knows who you are, is the polls that you do on Twitter. You do like those massive March Madness polls about like different Disney things like live action movies or actors or animated films or, theme park rides. I think you've been called the Trump of bracketology, according to your Twitter account.
Yes. So I think he's an ex-Fox News commentator, Andy Levy, one time. I was talking about, so he just said, you're the Trump of bracketology. And I thought that sounds Good. That's a Twitter bio mention to me, because who doesn't want to be compared to Donald Trump? I've been doing brackets since basically the current unpleasantness began in March. I saw somebody else doing a Disney animation bracket, and I thought, well, this is all wrong. I don't like any of the placements here. And then I thought, why don't I just do that? And people seemed to enjoy it, and I think this. Right now, I don't know when this is going to be published, but I am wrapping up the live action performances bracket. We're in the final 4 of that now, and I've got like 6 or 7 more planned. So I'll be doing this for a while.
Who's made the final 4 in the live action?
Well, that tells me you haven't voted yet today, and that makes me very.
Oh, it's for the listeners. Come on, I vote regularly.
I know. So the final 4 are Bob Hoskins as Eddie Valiant in Who Framed Roger Rabbit versus Julie Andrews in / as Mary Poppins, and Amy Adams in Enchanted versus Tim Curry in Muppet Treasure Island.
So for my money, Hoskins and Andrews should be the finals. Like, do you take pleasure in like intentionally seeding these like really difficult choices throughout the early rounds of the brackets?
Well, I mean, final 4. We're not in the early rounds anymore. I mean, to be fair, sure. we're getting pretty close there. What I would say is I usually don't spend a ton of time thinking about what's this going to look like when it's the Elite 8 or the Final 4, as much as do the general seedings of, is Tim Curry a 2 seed? I can't make him a 1 seed because I feel in the quarter of the bracket that he was in, it was Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow as a 1 seed.
Yeah.
That to me was kind of art versus the artist of like, now Johnny Depp, not a big fan, but he got an Academy Award nomination. It is a massively popular film, a character that completely redefined him as an actor and as a performer. Like, it felt like that was too big. But other than like the initial, like when it's 64 seeds, I don't spend a ton of time into that, to the point where like somebody, I forget who said this to me when I unveiled this bracket, said, I'm so terrified it's going to end up being Julie Andrews versus Amy Adams. And I said, it's possible. And as of right now, it is still very possible. Although I got, depending on who follows along with the brackets and who signal boosts things, sometimes I get a lot more votes than other times. And the critic Alan Sepinwall from Rolling Stone apparently loves to follow along with these brackets, and he boosted this one. The one that's going on tonight is Hoskins versus Andrews, and I think because of his push, it probably will not be Julie Andrews in the top 2. She is currently now trailing, and it's hard. But my personal pick of these 4, it's Bob Hoskins. He's I think pretty classic. I did have a couple actors from the film that you and I are talking about tonight in the overall bracket, but sadly, neither of them made it this far.
I'm going to guess Dalton and is it Campbell? Campbell? Yeah.
Bill Campbell, absolutely. I learned during this bracket, by the way, that a lot of people have very strong feelings in a positive way towards Jason Segel, who is the actor who defeated Bill Campbell, Jason Segel in The Muppets. And I'm apparently fairly joyless when it comes to that first new movie, because all I thought to myself was, him? Really? Him? Like Michael Bluth style him? Because when I saw The Muppets originally, I liked it a lot. Watching it again over time, it's like, I like the parts with the Muppets, not the parts with the humans as much.
Right.
Anyway, that's so he built Bill Campbell, and people were not sad about that. Bill Campbell was like, oh, anybody could have played the Rocketeer, and it's like, I guess anybody could have, but only one person did, and he did a very good job of playing that character.
Well, also, I would think it has to do with the fact that the Rocketeer just is not as well seen or popular of a movie as that first Muppets movie from 10 years ago or whatever.
I mean, recency bias, I'm sure, plays a part. There are people around my age, and I'm not sure how old you are, but I mean, I was born in '84, so kids of the 90s, I think there are some of us who really love The Rocketeer. Timothy Dalton made it pretty far. I think he made it to the Sweet 16. So Dalton did not was not diminished, but I think it's just a case of people maybe don't remember who Bill Campbell is in the same way that they, from Freaks and Geeks or How I Met Your Mother, they know who Jason Segel is. Who knows?
Yeah. So what's been your biggest surprise doing these polls?
I mean, it varies. Usually the surprise is that there are some actors or some films or theme park stuff that really can go very far. The one example, and ties into what I was just talking about, I believe when it came to theme park attractions, I'd have to go back and look because it feels like it's been a while. It's like years and years ago. It hasn't been. I want to say the top two was the Haunted Mansion versus Muppet Vision 3D.
Yeah, that's insane right there.
It's insane. And at the same time, like, I went through it afterward. I think so. The shock is the people who love the Muppets, and I generally am a big fan of the Muppets as well. Tim Curry, in my opinion, I would pick him over Amy Adams in the other half of the top two. Yeah. I'm sure he's not going to win, but I would pick him. I'm a big Muppet fan. I was surprised at how well Muppet Vision 3D did, and I suppose I shouldn't have been. You know, Kermit is a beloved character, and it has the benefit of being one of the last times that Jim Henson performed as Kermit the Frog, but that was one that just really, I was genuinely surprised. And the other thing is, honestly, on a much larger level, when I did that first bracket, there was part of me that thought, I have a lot of Twitter followers relative to some other people, but that doesn't mean they pay attention to what you tweet. And I wasn't really sure that anybody was going to care that I was doing this. And then it's like, oh, people seem to want this. People seem to expect this. More people seem to notice the dumb shit I'm tweeting because I'm doing these brackets. And, you know, it's weird. I did a podcast for all these years before 2020, and now I've got this, and this kind of takes up my time in the same way, but it's fun in a different capacity.
You found your niche, but
I found a new niche after I stopped doing the show that I did for 8.5 years.
Oh wow! But like with the Muppet Vision 3D thing, I mean that, like, first off, you don't really expect a movie to win the theme park bracket. You think it's going to be a ride. At least I would think so. And secondly, that's not even really a great movie. Like I love to do Muppet Vision 3D when I go, and like my enjoyment of it usually ends when I get into the theater. Like the best parts of it are like waiting in that waiting room and like the little like videos they run beforehand. And I mean, really, once like the 3D character, I forget the name of him, like the little like creature they created for the movie, once he shows up, it's sort of
Waldo. Right?
Yes, Waldo. Yeah, it just kind of like kills the whole vibe at that point for me, at least. But
so I have to clarify. I know you live very close to Walt Disney World relative to me. I have not been to Disney World since 2012, so it's been a long time. I'm a big theme park fan. I've been to Disneyland a number of times in that period of time because obviously I live in Phoenix, so I'm much closer for me to drive there. It's not something I do all the time, but I usually, my wife and I will bring our kid, our son. We haven't brought our younger son there yet because he was born 2 months before the pandemic started, so we haven't been to Disneyland in a while. But I love Muppet Vision 3D, and so before Disney California Adventure replaced it with movie ads and then eventually Mickey's PhilharMagic, which I do like, I'm a big fan of Muppet Vision 3D. I don't know if I'm a top 2 Disney theme park attractions fan, but there were, like, I probably would have put it at least in the Sweet 16 because I enjoy that film. I think part of it is just that sense that you can't get anything else with Jim Henson after, this movie or the Muppets at Walt Disney World special that aired in May 1990. There's that inescapable quality of that's the original Kermit the Frog. That's the Kermit the Frog. And I mean, it's a movie, but it's more than a movie. I mean, it is a sensory experience, a 1990 version of that.
Right.
But, to be clear, Haunted Mansion did win the overall thing. Good. Muppet Vision 3D got to the top 2. It did not win the whole thing, which
that's just like a mobilized fan base. That's like when Time Magazine had an online poll for Man of the Century in 2000, and the pro wrestler Mick Foley won it because all the wrestling fans just crashed the poll. Basically, the Muppet fans just showed out for you.
I always tell people, if you want your favorite to move on, you gotta share the poll. You vote, of course, but you have to share them, or else you'll be disappointed. I know there were some people who've been disappointed with other results, and it's like, you gotta push. And I try to retweet as much as I can without being too obnoxious, but people gotta do their part.
Yeah. So how did you become a guy who writes almost exclusively about Disney?
Well, so the podcast was kind of the start of it. The podcast that I hosted starting in 2011, which was called Mousterpiece Cinema. because I was very clever with that name. I did that show for 8.5 years, probably including our bonus episodes. I probably have 450 episodes of the show, which was each week kind of similar to what you're doing. Each week talking about a different Disney movie. The difference being, it was, theatrical releases. It eventually encompassed, Pixar, Disney, Miramax for a time, Touchstone, Hollywood, Marvel. And here's the thing: I started doing that podcast, I think 6 months before Disney bought Marvel.
Oh, wow.
Or I'm trying to think. I'm sorry, I misspeak. It was after they bought Marvel, but it was before they bought Lucasfilm, and they hadn't actually begun releasing. It wasn't Disney's Marvel movies. It was still Paramount releasing them. So I began doing this show. That led to me writing for a couple of different sites, and eventually it led to me getting an editorial position at a website called Movie Mezzanine, which has sadly gone defunct. And then in the last few years, it's been a lot of freelance writing at places like Slash Film, Screen Crush, Sci-Fi, The Verge. I've been published at the Washington Post inexplicably. So that was because
awesome.
of when Disney Plus went. It was very impressive, but it was also like, I have a byline here for one time. But it was because of when Disney Plus went live last year, and that was something, that when that went live, I had been on my not at all popular podcast, but I've been doing this podcast for so long, and I've been arguing for years that Disney should be doing something like a streaming service that they own, where they would just post everything they ever had. And I half got my dream because they have not posted remotely as much as they could, but they have their own streaming service now. So, and I ended up wrapping the podcast with the last new Star Wars film because I wanted to go out with a bang, or a whimper, depending on what you think of that movie. I think it was more of a whimper, unfortunately. But I'd done it for so long, and you're a fan of Rise of Skywalker?
Oh, no, I was going to say I'm going to save my opinion on that until whenever someone picks it to talk about on the show I'm doing right here. No, it's all right. It's okay.
I do not envy the masochist who chooses to pick that movie to talk with you. But anyway, my point, even before that, seeing it, I just thought it's this big new thing that has been talked about for years. It felt like an appropriate culmination. And again, it was right before my second son was born. So I thought I probably should not be focusing as much on a podcast because it, as you know, I'm sure now, it takes up some time. It can be sometimes challenging. So yeah, but that was the big one. That the podcast led to writing. So
awesome. Yeah. Did you ever have George Plimpton as a guest on Masterpiece Cinema? I guess that's slightly different than Masterpiece Theater.
It is. And I originally was like, it'd be Masterpiece Theater, but for two reasons. First, I was like, I don't know that anybody from Disney is ever going to notice that I do this show, but what if somebody doesn't? It's a legal thing that I stole their title. So I went with cinema because I also thought, well, it's movies. Theater makes it seem more like it's on the stage. And I thought about it more than I should have. But no, sadly, George Plimpton was never on the show. We had a number of very good guests, though. A lot of writers, a lot of critics. And anybody who is curious, you feel free to dig right into those archives. They are all available. It is all searchable out there. And I don't know if I envy you your journey. I have never listened to a single episode back after editing it. I just put it out there in the world, and the rest of it is up to the listener.
That's definitely what's going to happen here too. So, push comes to shove. Disney, what's your favorite? Animation, theme parks, live action? What's the best thing about Disney in your opinion?
Animation. That's easy because one thing I remember, this was more surprising to me back in the early 2010s when I really got into theme park stuff, which that started when my wife and I took our honeymoon. We went to Walt Disney World, and that kind of opened my eyes up to what I thought was genuinely really incredible, atmosphere and architectural triumph. And I was surprised, though, going to the various fan forums that most theme park fans who I encountered didn't seem to really have an interest in the movies, which I thought was weird because I thought, the movies lead to the theme parks. We don't have a lot of the stuff that's in the parks if it isn't for the movies, not just from a fiscal standpoint, but from a creative standpoint. So for me, it's always going to be animation. I mean, when I go to Disney Plus now to watch something that I want to watch, at least half the time it's, golden age or old school Disney animation from before Walt Disney passed away, whether it's, Sleeping Beauty or Fantasia or The Three Caballeros is a film. Like I've been weirdly, the more I watch that movie, the more I kind of love that movie. And when I recorded the podcast about that one like 8 years ago, I was like, this is not that great. It's kind of interesting, but too episodic. And now I watch it and I get a lot more sucked into the experience of it. But yeah, the animation
it's so
is
psychedelic. Like the Three Caballeros,
yes.
like it's gorgeous, and it is like sort of like the least tethered to reality of any of the animated Disney classics, you know?
It is. I've written about it at /film. It is, among other things, and I think you may have commented. I think I saw you tweet about this recently.
I rewatched it a couple weeks ago. So.
It's the horniest movie that Disney ever made. Like Donald Duck in that film, because in the timeline of him as a character, I think Daisy Duck had been introduced in a short, but it wasn't like she was established as his always girlfriend. And at least half of what Donald does in the Three Caballeros is just do like Tex Avery style wolf whistling and eyes bulging at beautiful women. And it's real women, you know, they mix live action and animation, and it's funny and also really weird because, among other things, I think it is accurate to say the Disney of today would not make a movie like that, where one of its iconic characters just drools over women for 80 minutes.
And that's the kind of thing I want to talk about on the show, is how family entertainment, especially the way Disney approaches it, has changed over the last century. But hey, we're not doing Three Caballeros, unfortunately. We're doing a live action movie. You picked a live action movie despite loving animation. You picked The Rocketeer, as we've already mentioned, which came out in 1991. I'm a little bit older than you. I think I was in middle school when The Rocketeer came out. And I could tell you right now, I had absolutely no interest in it whatsoever.
Does that mean that this is your first time seeing The Rocketeer?
So I actually watched it the day Disney Plus launched. It's the first thing I watched on Disney Plus, because in the years since, I read more about it, and I figured this is the kind of thing that as an adult, like, I would absolutely love. And sure enough, it's really great. I'm bummed that I thought I was too cool for it when I was 13 or whatever.
Well, so here's the thing. I'm sure since you read about it, you know the unfortunate timing of when this film was released. Yes.
Right around the Persian Gulf, right?
Well, no. I mean compared to other films that opened that summer.
Okay, let me think here. 91, June of 91. Yes. What would that have been? Not the second Batman. That was 92. What was it? Go ahead, tell me. Fill me in.
So Rocketeer opens June 21st, 1991. Which I want to clarify. I am such a cool person that I didn't even have to look that up. I just knew. I've saved that information in my head. June 14th, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
A much worse movie, but a much bigger
hit. But wait, July 3rd, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. So leaving aside quality, T2 is great. Robin Hood is not. These are both massively successful films that are courting similar audiences, and obviously not as family friendly. And The Rocketeer, I would have been 6 going on 7. And I saw that movie, and I just fell head over heels for The Rocketeer in the summer of 91. I loved it. I remember I watched it. I'm sure I saw it at least one more time in theaters. I watched it a couple more times on VHS. And the podcast is actually an appropriate thing for me to have mentioned before, because when I started doing the podcast in 2011, I was doing it by myself. I didn't have a co-host at that time. I eventually did. But at that time, it was just me, which meant, of course, that I was choosing whatever I wanted to watch. I was thinking, what do I want to talk about this week? And looking at the long list of movies from the Walt Disney Company, even just Walt Disney Pictures, I saw The Rocketeer and I thought, I haven't seen this movie in probably at least 15 years. Boy, I loved The Rocketeer as a kid. I'm going to choose that to talk about. But one of the reasons why I wanted to choose it, but I was also dreading it. Perhaps it is odd that I did a show about Walt Disney movies, because I am not a huge fan of just nostalgia for nostalgia's sake.
Right.
And I was really worried that I was going to watch this movie from when I was a kid, a movie that I had this nostalgia for, and I'd watch it and realize, like most kids, I had shitty taste because this movie was not very good. Like, I was worried that was going to happen. And then I watched it that time. I think it was like the 8th episode of the show. I did it very early on. And I watched it and I thought, oh, thank goodness, this is even better than I remembered it being. I was so thrilled that it was as much fun as it was, because I really was worried going into it.
Yeah.
Like, is this going to suck? And it did not. Not at all.
I think there was like this feeling at the time, at least for me, coming the year after Dick Tracy, the 2 years after Batman, this other, superhero comic book movie, but a comic I had never heard of before, despite being a huge comic book fan. It just felt, a little played out at that point. Like, who would want to go see this character you've never heard of when we've already had like these huge budget Batman and Dick Tracy movies that were, varyingly good or funny, depending on your tastes or whatever. I don't know. It felt sort of, not like a ripoff, but totally as just following the trend of the move set by those other two movies,
Well, and that's the weirdest thing to me, because both Dick Tracy and The Rocketeer sprung from the perception that Jeffrey Katzenberg had of like, we need to do something that's going to be our version of Batman. And it really feels like with both cases, and this is not a bad thing, all they saw with Batman was great production design steeped in Art Deco 30s, 40s era style. Like, that's what we want to do. And I mean, The Rocketeer, I think I wrote about this. I think I wrote about this at its 25th anniversary at the AV Club. I wrote about how The Rocketeer is the Indiana Jones sequel that we all like. That's it. We don't need to have a fourth Indiana Jones film, because as we all know, there have only been three. We don't need to have another one, because this movie fits in that style. It has that setting of the late 30s. It's not America's entry into World War II yet, but it's obviously there. We have Nazis as the bad guy. You have this throwback style. There's also a bit of Back to the Future in there a little bit. The relationship between Cliff Secord and PV has a little bit of a Marty McFly, Doc Brown thing. Yeah. But you don't like it has it, and so it has that design that feels like it was inspired by Batman in terms of what the movie was going to look like. It was going to be very polished and very impressive, even if it didn't have the craziest, highest budget. But obviously it's not nearly as dark, and I think it would have. I think, frankly, the fact that The Rocketeer isn't dark is one of its best qualities. It's
Absolutely.
Not that it's not that it doesn't feature terrifying figures. The Nazis you have. You mentioned that it's live action, but there is animation in this movie. There is that little that animation section from Mark Dindal, who went on to direct The Emperor's New Groove. That little bit of propaganda, faux propaganda about what the Nazis are going to try to do with the jetpack, and. You have this darkness encroaching, but there's such a buoyant spirit to the entire film that I think is one of its most winning elements.
Yeah, that optimism, which is very period appropriate for the late 30s, early 40s, it's what makes me like the movie so much today. And it is so different from the trends of superhero media of the last 30 years, since the mid 80s, really. And like the fact that it's, like you were saying, able to stay optimistic in the light of the greatest darkness that the world had ever seen at the time. It's inspiring, And if they had actually pitched it publicly, more of this is an Indiana Jones style adventure and not, hey, here's a superhero movie with a character you've never heard of, I probably would have been there to see it in 1991.
Well, and the unfortunate, like, when you go back and look at how they marketed the movie, a lot of the design of it is, I think, really cool. Like, there's this really great Art Deco poster where it's just this stylized version, image of the Rocketeer in flight, and it's really cool. But of course, it tells you nothing about the movie outside of there's a guy in a suit who flies, and there is a great cast of character actors here, but. Unlike Harrison Ford with Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't have an A-list actor who is fresh off of this very big franchise. People like Alan Arkin and Paul Sorvino and Timothy Dalton are all quite good in the film. Timothy Dalton, I'm sure I guess the novelty of it would have been he was James Bond and now he's the bad guy.
Yeah, he was absolutely the biggest name at the time, and it was totally because of Bond. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, again. As a movie by itself, it's a great thing, but I can certainly see how it would have, if not turned off audiences, just kind of perplexed them at the time. Because, at least even with Dick Tracy, you can say Warren Beatty, Madonna, Al Pacino, like big name actors. This one, you have great actors, but not automatically, I got to go see the new Alan Arkin film, the new Terry O'Quinn movie. I'm sure people were salivating after The Stepfather.
Yeah. Yeah, Dick Tracy was totally pitched on, go see De Niro and Hoffman wear a ton of makeup and speak in weird accents,
Hey,
and the Rocketeer doesn't have that.
Not De Niro.
Oh my God. You're right. Sorry.
No, but you're right though. You have the star power that they were able to push with Dick Tracy. It didn't work, but you can at least didn't work as well as they wanted it to at least. But you have that presence with this. I think they probably were also hoping for better reviews, which I know the reviews were mixed at the time, which happens. But yeah, I mean, it's a film that I adore so much. And, you mentioned the encroaching darkness, the scene that I can't possibly ignore. I have to mention it, or else I'm going to feel ashamed of myself. One of the greatest scenes in movie history. I say this with as little hyperbole as possible. When the Rocketeer, when Cliff confronts Eddie Valentine, the mobster who's been working for Neville Sinclair, revealing that Neville Sinclair is a Nazi, and Eddie Valentine says, "I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American." That is one of the great moments, and it's one of those things that resonates even more now. I have no idea.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up, how this movie is very relevant for what's happening in America today. Way more than I think they ever could have imagined when they made it 30 years ago.
Yep. I think that, it's weirdly timely. And frankly, even before it felt weirdly timely, that's the kind of thing where if it was in a Marvel movie, it would cause audiences to shout and cheer. And it is worth mentioning that Joe Johnston, who directed this film, 20 years later went on to direct Captain America, the First Avenger, which is a job he got. I believe they've actually acknowledged he got the job in part because of the Rocketeer, because it had the same kind of quality, that that upbeat, optimistic sense, at least for the 40s era, kind of a superhero film. He was the right person for it, and he clearly was. I like this movie more than I like Captain America, the First Avenger, but that is certainly an enjoyable film that is reminiscent enough in the right way of this hero.
You're anticipating my notes. I was going to bring up the Captain America connection and ask how you felt about that in comparison to the Rocketeer. So one thing that this movie made me think about, and this is like a larger problem that Disney's had for a few decades now. Pirates of the Caribbean was sort of a weird blip. Before they bought Marvel and Star Wars, they've had a really hard time making successful live action movies for a young male audience, going back decades. I think The Rocketeer is, one of the, probably not the biggest failure by far, but it's one of the more notable ones when it comes to that. Why do you think they've had such a hard time, like actively being able to like attract that audience to their live action films?
I mean, I think part of the problem is that they're chasing trends instead of trying to create them. I think to myself, in the years before The Rocketeer, a couple of the good examples would have been The Black Hole and Tron. And, they're both on Disney Plus, and they're both very weird movies. Tron is also one I did very, very early on in the show, because it wasn't even a year after Tron Legacy, which I had seen first. I'd seen Tron Legacy, and I thought, wow, that movie was visually really impressive. It had a great score. The characters and the plot didn't make a lick of sense. And then I watched the original Tron, and I thought, well, the story is kind of interesting. The visuals are kind of clunky. It was like, it's interesting that movie, but both of those films felt like they were Disney saying, we got to do Star Wars. We got to do something that's Star Wars like. And with The Rocketeer, we got to do something like Batman or Indiana Jones or Back to the Future. And, even something like Tron Legacy, which I mentioned, that was a film that was clearly meant to attract, a young male audience, or John Carter a couple of years later. And, those are both very impressive films visually, in terms of the fact that you've got these directors working with these massive budgets, but it doesn't come together. I think it's just that they can't quite figure out live action in the same way. And so in the recent history, all that Disney had to do was buy the trends that have been making people excited at the theater. Like, they don't have to worry about what they're going to build with their own live action films, because even now, it should be worth noting, whether it's for young male or young female audiences, a lot of the live action films they've had that aren't Marvel or Star Wars have not been very successful. I am, of course, ignoring the remakes that they've made, because I would like to pretend those do not exist. But no, I'm thinking about stuff like A Wrinkle in Time, or, mid 2010 stuff like McFarland USA or Million Dollar Arm, which are films that exist. I hope people listening remember them. They're real movies. Those are films that they're not really comfortable, I think, with live action. So when you were asking me before, animation, parks, live action, to be like, live action would have been third on that list any day of the week. As much as I love The Rocketeer, because I think movies like this are pretty rare for them.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you when it comes to, putting the live action third. Maybe it's because, with the animation studio, you have, this decades, generations of institutional memory that has been passed down from generation to generation. I think Katzenberg, there's that story of when he came in the 80s and thought he could edit Black Cauldron, not realizing that you can't edit animation that way. I feel like the execs are way more hands-on with live action than they are with animation. And maybe that's why animation has been much stronger overall than live action for them.
Well, and I think, before Katzenberg and Michael Eisner joined, I mean, Disney was a much more, I don't want to say mom and pop kind of studio, but it was not the same kind of supercharged corporation we think of today. And it did start with Katzenberg and Eisner kind of expanding their reach and treating it more like Paramount, where they worked before they joined Disney. But I think there is also a sense of like Disney live action is almost intentionally rinky-dink, like it's low rent, almost because they don't have the money after they made such big splashy films like Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks back in the, either right before Walt Disney's passing or soon after. They were able to, they tried to harness the big epic musical trend that was sweeping through a lot of different studios. I just, like, even I'm thinking through, though, even like past The Rocketeer in the 90s, when I think about Disney live action, what I think about primarily are films like The Mighty Ducks or A Kid in King Arthur's Court, movies that are, a few steps removed from a Disney Channel original. No offense to The Mighty Ducks, which is fine.
Right.
But I mean, they're not movies they're movies with low budgets. They might have one star or kind of star, and they're not meant to be big successes. They're just meant to make a decent profit. And hey, if it becomes a sleeper hit, great. Lucky win for us,
Yeah. And you mentioned Pirates, and I think one reason that was such a big hit is because it wasn't really chasing trends. There wasn't like a run of popular pirate movies in the early aughts or anything.
Well, on that movie, I mean, it's perhaps hard to consider it now, but that movie was such a risk for Disney because they'd only just begun making films based on their attractions. And if memory serves correctly, the previous summer, they started with the true classic, The Country Bears.
Yes. That and Haunted Mansion both came before Pirates.
Well, Haunted Mansion came out after Pirates of the Caribbean. Haunted Mansion was November 2003, which, again, I hope everybody understands. I don't even have to look this stuff up.
I thought it was November 2002, so that's why you're the expert, and I'm just the man talking to the expert.
I don't know that I should be very pleased about knowing this stuff. But no, I mean, the point is, Country Bears was certainly much more low budget. It was not trying to be some big epic thing, but it also, A, performed badly at the box office, and B, sucked.
I know it's weird as hell.
Like country music, it's very weird. It's an extremely weird movie. If you like country music, I mean, you have people like John Hyatt and Bonnie Raitt making, singing and performing that. And it's like, the music might be fine, but the Bears, no, not. I mean, I'm not a huge Country Bear Jamboree fan. I have to admit, maybe this is I haven't been to Walt Disney World since I was a little kid. That probably is part of it, but I'm not a huge fan. Either way, the point is, like,
I'm from Georgia, so that's those are my people. That's my culture. It's inspiring to see a world that I know recognizably shown before me as entertainment, like in the Country Bear Jamboree. So
I hope that all the different swinging Teddy Bear. I hope you don't have to encounter too many people like that. No, but I mean, Pirates was a huge risk for Disney, just a huge budget. Gore Verbinski was a well-liked director, but even The Ring, the previous fall, had not, I think, made it clear, oh yeah, we're going to entrust this guy with this multi-$100 million budget, and you have Johnny Depp, who is a well-liked actor at the time, but not an A-lister, and he comes in with this weird accent, and I remember, I believe Michael Eisner, they had to talk him down from like not having him redo it or get recast because of how weird and off kilter it was. But
yeah,
yeah, I think that was the case. They weren't chasing the trend. They managed to create something out of a genre that had not been popular for a really long time. And yeah, it's a hard movie to rewatch now because for me, because A, it feels like Johnny Depp plays Captain Jack Sparrow in everything he does, which makes it exhausting. And B, Johnny Depp, just as a person. But we don't need to get into that.
It's hard to remember how non-existent the expectations were for that movie when it came out.
Sure.
I think that's one reason it also became such a big popular hit, is because it was on no one's radar. Like, people thought it was going to be a big flop, and then it comes out and actually people were like, hey, this is really fun. You need to go see this dumb pirate movie with Johnny Depp in it. And it just shocked people, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
As a theme park fan, as a kid who, I grew up in Florida, went to the parks every year. I'm not happy about like sort of the influence that the movie has had on the ride itself. But it's still, that first movie at least is really fun.
Yeah. Oh, I like to some element, I like all three of the Verbinski films because he has a much clearer directorial vision than a Rob Marshall or I forget the guys who directed the fifth one, but I know somebody else directed the fifth one. I mean, he has a distinctive vision, and there are weird things in those two sequels that you have to imagine he can only do because the first one was such a big hit. But again, it's exhausting to think about Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow now because he's just in everything. And again, I think especially in the last few years, his public persona has taken a dive to the point where when I started doing this current bracket, there were a couple of people who were like, boy, I hope he doesn't win. Yeah. I was like, I kind of hope so too, but I'm not gonna, I can't do a whole lot. And he did get eliminated by now, but
so yeah. I actually haven't even seen any of the sequels, so maybe someday doing
not
the
even
show,
the second
I will.
or third one.
No, I never saw them for whatever reason, so yeah.
I mean, the second and third one are very interesting. They have the Matrix sequels problem in that they were written and filmed together, and it kind of feels like one very, very bloated film. But there are a lot of really striking visuals in both of the sequels. There's some pretty solid action sequences as well. And I mean, the other thing I would point out that may or may not interest you, the CG on Bill Nighy as Davy Jones is arguably the best CG character of the last 15 years. It is one of the most impressive. I'm not even kidding. It's a really impressive bit of computer wizardry because when you think about Bill Nighy as an actor, he's a very expressive performer. Like he uses a lot of his face. He's not really kind of, stolid or robotic. And it's very impressive how they captured every single nuance.
So you can see his expressions through the tentacles that he has dangling from his mouth.
It might sound ridiculous to you, but I'm telling you, it's true.
No, I trust you. I really like that character design. Like I've seen him in video games and everything, and it's a really well designed character. And I'm going to see the movie someday. I don't
like the influence of the other movies now that I think. Now that you haven't seen the sequels, I can definitely see why going through the ride and seeing Ian McShane as Blackbeard or Dave or Phil Nighy, it's like, I don't even know who these guys are. Yeah,
I think they maybe got rid of those. Maybe
they did eventually, but I mean, they did. They had them for a while. And the Ian McShane one, I basically just took comfort watching that every time and thinking, Ian McShane got paid to do this. I hope he got paid well because he got wasted. His character, he plays Blackbeard in the fourth one, and it's just a huge waste of him as a performer, which is infuriating. Because if you've ever seen him on Deadwood or the John Wick movies or Sexy Beast,
any of the things he's done over the last 50 years,
well, it's like he's a pretty talented performer, and you waste him in this. It's frustrating.
I mean, Hot Rod. Have you seen Hot Rod? He's fantastic in that.
Yeah.
So getting back to the Rocketeer, we should probably wrap this up. It's been going on for a while. I know they have a cartoon out now, right, based on the Rocketeer.
It is a Disney Junior show called The Rocketeer, and on the one hand, I've seen a couple episodes because my son is 6, and so he's in the right age range for this show. On the one hand, I am thrilled to see The Rocketeer getting any kind of revival. And Bill Campbell, I believe, plays the dad of the lead character, this young girl, Kit, and it's like good for him getting a paycheck. And
Yeah.
if you are a fan of this movie, of the characters, of the one thing we haven't mentioned, which is one of my favorite parts, which is the score by James
Oh yeah.
Horner, one of the greatest, I think his greatest work is in this movie. That opening theme is his best work. If you like any of that, and you are expecting to see any of that in the show, you are not going to be very pleased. It's not like there's a girl with a jetpack, but otherwise and there, a lot of it takes place on an airfield, but it's very, 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 very different. So,
When is the time period? Is it set today?
I believe so. Again, I've only seen a couple episodes, but it definitely does not have the 30s flair to it. And again, that's fine. It's been 20-something years. People obviously were not crazy for the film originally, but I mean, a few years ago, there was talk about a sequel of sorts. I suppose it would have been, as the writer Matt Singer calls them, legacy-quels. It would have been one of those where it's like a few years after World War II, a young pilot would have found the suit that Cliff Secord left behind. But it's always just been one of those things where they're developing it. And, I know that it would do a lot better than, say, Tron Legacy did in 2010, but I do genuinely think you've had the right ingredients in place, right? Filmmaker, cast, you actually could do a new Rocketeer movie pretty effectively.
Yeah. Did they ever play this on Disney Channel in the 90s?
Probably. I don't know for sure.
I'm thinking about a movie like Hocus Pocus, which, my wife and I were talking about this literally last night. That is so inexplicably popular today, like in our opinions, because that movie came and went.
So I don't think it's inexplicably popular. You're a few years older than me, which I believe means you're not a millennial, right?
I'm just past it. I am the bottom edge of Gen X, whereas my wife is the oldest millennial you can be, I believe.
So I think it's millennials. I think it's millennials around my age too, because that movie came out when I was 8, going on 9, and I saw it in theaters, and I thought, okay. And it's one of those where I think it just became a beloved cultural object for children of the 90s, and I have seen it since as an adult, and it is quite bad.
Yeah. It feels like I assume annual October replays on Disney Channel multiple times a month every year.
ABC Family too. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, like, did that not happen with Rocketeer? Like, what made Hocus Pocus? Which this is a question for the Hocus Pocus episode that might happen in the future. What made Hocus Pocus have this massive second life that other films did not quite have?
I mean, I think something that has to help a movie like Hocus Pocus in the same way that it's helped Nightmare Before Christmas, which came out the same year. They're both about holidays. The Rocketeer doesn't have the benefit of being tied to a holiday, whereas Hocus Pocus, every year they can reliably say, we have 2 hours to fill with this Halloween movie.
Wouldn't
which
you
I
agree?
should note, one of my favorite... it's a terrible film. I can't stand it at all. I don't want to defend the movie. I do love, by the way, very quickly, Hocus Pocus, a Halloween movie released in the middle of July. 93. Yeah. It's one of the most baffling choices they ever made. But I think it's the Halloween thing. It's the holiday. They're always able to put something on during a holiday. And it's at the parks too, right?
I believe, they have it there. Well, maybe not this year because of all the pandemic stuff, but like normally during the Mickey's Not So Scary Party, they have a live show. But when it comes to holidays, what holiday is bigger or should deserve more of a celebration than beating the Nazis, right? I mean, VE Day, all of that. Like, shouldn't we be seeing the Rocketeer every year on the 4th of July, right? On D-Day? Like, come on.
He is one of the most American superheroes you could ever find without it being like patriotism shoved down your throat. You don't have to convince me. I have been leading the charge for the Rocketeer for years. So I am all in.
Thanks for talking about it. Like, I had already watched it before, but like I really did love it the first time I saw it a year ago, and I regretted not being into it when I was younger. And it's cool to talk about it with a legitimate expert on the subject like you.
Well, thank you for having me.
So where can listeners find your work these days if they want to follow up and learn more about Josh Spiegel?
The best place is on Twitter. I'm at Mousterpiece.
Okay, thanks again, Josh Spiegel. Thanks for listening to What the Plus. I'm Garrett Martin. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode on Thursday, assuming I make it back from Orlando safely, soundly, with all my faculties intact. Until then, thanks again and have a great weekend.